In a small town, there was a detective, Samuel Blackwood. He leaned back in his worn leather chair, staring into the flickering light of the lamp of dancing shadows on the walls from his lit office. The room was testimony to years of tireless investigation, filled with dusty volumes, faded newspaper clippings, and evidence from past cases. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, his thoughts were consumed by something new that had eluded him for weeks, that of the missing heiress, Evelyn Sinclair. It started like any other mission. Samuel had received a call from Mrs. Sinclair, a wealthy socialite, begging for help in finding her daughter. Evelyn, a beautiful young woman with a penchant for trouble, had disappeared without a trace from the sprawling family home located on the outskirts of town. Samuel took the case, driven by a sense of purpose and a desire to discover the truth. As he delved deeper into the investigation, Samuel found himself trapped in a web of secrets and lies. Everyone he questioned seemed to have something, from Evelyn's father, who harbored resentment towards ex-wife and his daughter, to the servants who whispered in low voices whenever his name was spoken. But it was Evelyn's closest confidant, childhood companion, Lily Graham, who caught Samuel's attention. There was something in the way she looked away every time he asked about Evelyn's disappearance, something in the tremor of her voice that triggered an alarm bell in mind. Determined to discover the truth, Samuel set out to find it by following a breadcrumb trail which led him to a dilapidated building on the outskirts of the city. The streets were deserted, the air heavy with the smell of decay. Samuel walked up the creaky staircase to the third floor, his heart in his chest as he knocked on Lily's apartment door. It opened to reveal a small, dimly lit room, stacks of books and half-empty whiskey bottles. Lily was sitting hunched over a typewriter in the corner, her fingers flying over the keys in a frenzy of activity. She looked up when Samuel entered, eyes in surprise. "Detective Blackwood," she said, her voice tinged with unease. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to ask you a few questions," Miss Samuel replied, in a firm but not mean tone. "About Evelyn Sinclair." Lily's hands froze on the typewriter, her face turning pale at the mention of the name. "I don't know anything," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room nervously. "I swear, I haven't seen her since she disappeared." Samuel studied it carefully, looking for the slightest sign of deception. But all he saw was fear, raw and unfiltered, shining in his eyes like one in the darkness. He sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "I want to believe you, Miss Graham," he said, "but something is wrong. Why did Evelyn come to see you the night she disappeared?" Lily's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles turning white with tension. She wanted to talk, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city outside. About her family, about her father. She was scared, detective. "I'm afraid of what he might do if he does." Samuel's brow furrowed in confusion. "Her father," he repeated. "What does he have to do with all this?" But before Lily could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, growing louder with each passing moment. Samuel tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver tucked into his coat pocket. He glanced at Lily, his eyes remaining silent as the door opened to reveal a tall and imposing figure framed in the door. It was Evelyn's father, James Sinclair, his face contorted into a mask of fury as he burst into the room. "What does this mean?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. "What are you doing here, detective?" Samuel remained in place, his gaze steady as he met Sinclair's accusing gaze. "I'm here to ask you a few questions, Mr. Sinclair," he said calmly, "about your daughter." Sinclair's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering their icy blue depths. "My daughter is not looking at you," he spat, his voice disdainful. "She is an adult woman, perfectly capable of taking care." "But she also disappeared," replied Samuel, his voice hardening with determination. "And until she is found, I will do whatever it takes to find out the truth." Sinclair's face darkened with anger, his fists at his sides as he took a threatening step towards Samuel. "You have no right to question me," he growled, low and dangerous. "I suggest you leave before things get out of hand." But Samuel held on, his jaw clenched and stubborn. "Not until you tell me what happened to your daughter," he said, his voice unwavering despite the threat of violence looming in the air between them. For a long moment, there was silence, only for the distant sound of sirens wailing in the night. Then, Slowly, Sinclair's shoulders sagged in defeat, his gaze falling to the ground as if to meet Samuel's piercing gaze. I don't know, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the din of the city outside. I swear, I don't know where she is. Samuel studied him carefully, looking for the slightest trace of deception in his words. But all he saw was the same emotion he had seen in Lily's eyes, fear, pure and overwhelming, shining like a beacon in the darkness. He sighed, running his hand over his tired face. I want to believe you, Miss Graham, he said, but something is wrong. Why did Evelyn come to see you the night she disappeared? As he stepped out into the cold night air, could not help but feel that he was missing something vital that could once and for all solve the mystery of the disappearance of Evelyn Sinclair. But for the moment, all he could do was wait for the shadows of suspicion to give way to the light of truth, and pray that justice would eventually prevail. In the days that followed, Samuel Blackwood had to study all the leads, determined to put one to the case of the disappearance of Evelyn Sinclair. Despite his efforts, the trail went cold and the shadow of suspicion hung over everyone involved. Then, one rainy afternoon, a breakthrough came in the form of an anonymous tip. A body had been found, buried in a deep grave on the outskirts of town. Samuel rushed to the scene, his heart pounding in his chest as he discovered the truth that had been with him for so long. It was Evelyn Sinclair. Driven by a new feeling of determination, Samuel confronted once more, his gaze piercing through her facade to the guilt that lurked beneath. And this time, she admitted, her words transformed into a surge of remorse and regret. She had been jealous of Evelyn, jealous of the life she had led, the opportunities she had been given. And when Evelyn had confided in her that evening her intention to leave town and start again, the Lily had transformed into rage, consuming her in fits of blind fury. In a moment of madness, she had unleashed herself, striking with a blow that proved fatal. And then, consumed by guilt and fear, had buried the body of her friend in a desperate attempt to cover up her crime. As Lily was led away in handcuffs, her face stained with tears reflecting grief and despair, Samuel couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for what had been lost. But he also felt a glimmer of hope, the hope that had been returned and that Evelyn Sinclair could finally rest in peace, free from the shadow of suspicion that had haunted her life. And as he watched the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the city streets, Samuel knew that no matter how dark the night may seem, the light of truth would always find a way to shine through, illuminating even the darkest corners of the human heart.